We have about an hour, a little less, until the Fed's decision on interest rates. Let's get right over to Steve Liesman, who's already at the Federal Reserve. Steve, widely expected they'll cut by a quarter, but these are some strange conditions to be cutting in.
Very interesting, Kelly. Let me start first with Fed Chair Powell taking the podium with a new set of issues following the re-election of former President Trump. He's going to face a president who's been an outspoken critic personally and of Fed policy. 2019, he said the Fed had no guts, no sense, and no vision when it would cut rates. And a year later, he claimed he could demote the Fed chair. February 24, he threatened to fire Powell if reelected. In July of 24, he said he wouldn't fire Powell if he thought he was doing a good job. And then in September, he criticized the 50 basis point cut as being too big ahead of the election. Well, the Fed can ignore criticism. Most legal scholars think the president doesn't have the authority to replace the Fed chair without cause. But the Fed was already facing plenty of uncertainty about the economic outlook. Now there will be new issues about how the Fed responds to tariffs. They could be inflationary. Tax cuts, that could spur growth, but also balloon the deficit if they're not offset with spending cuts. Okay, here's the outlook for the Fed. 96% say we get a cut in about an hour. 79% say they go ahead and cut again in December. 4.4 is where they end the year, and 3.6 so cuts continue into 2025, according to respondents to the Fed survey, despite the higher interest rates. Both 24 and 25 are lower than the prior survey, but in line with where the future market is now. 3.3, that's the neutral rate the Fed is going to. So the Fed survey shows respondents think the Fed settles into lowering rates every other meeting next year, starting in March. But all that has a big asterisk next to it. Kelly, covering the Fed, just got a lot more interesting. Get some sleep.
I'm watching sort of the reporting on this. People mostly saying it looks like Trump would have Powell stay on. His term's not up until, I think, the middle of 2026. Kayla's talking about maybe Hassett, Warsh in the mix for his replacement. So not a lot of near-term change is likely. And I don't think there's a lot of turnover coming up on the board either, is there?
No, there is not until early 2026. And I did talk to a former Trump official who told me that the president has a lot of stuff on his plate, and having a big fight or a legal fight with the Fed is probably going to be lowered down, especially if rates are indeed coming down. I think there is some uncertainty. My guess is that Powell will move more slowly than the president-elect wants him to move, and that could be a point of contention. But again, we need to make a separation between this criticism that I think nothing's going to stop the president-elect from talking about the Fed, but whether or not that matters is a more important question.
Right. I mean, we have senators who are, this time it was Warren and the guy out of Colorado saying that the Fed should cut by half a point, and Congress is the one with direct oversight of the Fed, not the president.
That is correct. And I think you raised a really interesting point that the president will only have authority to change the Fed chair if Congress changes the Federal Reserve Act. And in fact, by the time that would ever happen, Chair Powell's term would be up. And you're right. I think criticism is one thing, but it's the idea of whether or not he goes further. I think Powell is fine taking it on the chin from the president. The question is whether or not it has any impact on what policy they do.
All right, Steve, for now, thanks.